Hi, my name is Lainey Hunter from Innovation Technologies. Today I am joined by Jasmyn Patmon from Aston Carter. She's a account manager that specializes in revenue cycle management and consulting. I'm super excited to have her today and ask her a couple of questions and get to know each other a little better. So, hello, Jasmyn. Thanks for joining
Of
me.
course, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Today, we're going to chat a little bit about your background. That's kind of how I want to start, talking about your background, working with clients in the healthcare and revenue cycle management space, kind of how you got started there. And I guess we'll start there, and then I'll definitely have some follow-up questions. I'm very curious about what you have to say. So,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I actually started with the organization in August. It'll be 10 years ago. I was a marketing major and actually supported our contract engineering. But in 2015, I had the opportunity to advance my career and transition to supporting our healthcare clients. So that's how I got involved with dealing with healthcare. And then a couple years later, as we continued to grow and specialize, we started building and carving out space for revenue cycles. So I was originally a recruiter, identifying talent for specific positions, and then in recent years transitioned over to the account management side, so directly supporting revenue cycle teams within hospital systems, provider networks, third-party integrators, and just figuring out what talent solution we could offer to help either build a team long term or fill any gaps that they might notice within their revenue cycle operation. So that's a little bit about my background and how I got involved in the space that I love so much now.
nice. And you, have since gotten really involved in the industry. It seems like you sit on the board for some healthcare
Yeah.
associations. You talk a little bit about
Yep.
that.
So in 2018, we really made a push internally to get involved with networking organizations where we could increase not just the opportunity to network with potential clients, but also our knowledge. And one of those organizations was HFMA, the Healthcare Financial Management Association. So I started going in 2018 when I was still a recruiter, continued to go, and then this past institute, I was inducted to serve as the chair for the communications committee. So really exciting opportunity just to give back to an organization that's taught me so much about what I know.
Very cool. So, in your opinion and what you've experienced in your years working with clients in this space, what do you see as the major challenges that healthcare is facing right now?
Yeah, so I can't remember if it was a webinar or an in person, but one of the institutes, there was a quote that came up. It said, "Revenue cycle is a puzzle you'll never solve because the picture is always changing." And I think that yeah, it kind of perfectly summarizes because it's always something. So whether it's people, um, I think it's no secret that the pandemic really, really changed the labor market. The labor market participation rate's been hovering around like 62% for the past couple years. So it's been really hard to attract and retain talent. So that's one big challenge. From a processes standpoint, some of the trends that I hear could be communication between the clinical staff and the revenue cycle team, or just navigating constant changes within the payer guidelines, creating an increase in denials and driving up the cost to collect and just kind of giving everyone a big headache. So those are a couple of the challenges. And then of course, from a technology standpoint, just trying to figure out what makes sense to automate in order to help with some of the issues that organizations are seeing from people and process standpoint.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So trying to find solutions to fill those gaps in talent or, in the changing regulations like you mentioned. So what do you specifically do at Aston Carter? Like what are some of the unique solutions that you're, looking into and working with your clients for?
Yeah, so I like to say that we offer customizable workforce solutions because we do recognize that every challenge is, even though there are trends within health organizations, every challenge still has some level of uniqueness to it. So we really try to dig in and understand, hey, what's the business need? What's the implication? And then just figure out, hey, how can we provide a solution that's going to alleviate some of those challenges we're most known for what we do within the staffing place. So a lot of our services, or a lot of what we're known for, is just being able to identify and provide quality talent. But I think one of the biggest things that I like to communicate with our clients is that, hey, from a cost saving standpoint, in a ever change, in a not ever changing necessarily, but in a tight labor market, it's expensive to make investments to find the talent, and to hope to retain them. So one of the, I think a while ago on LinkedIn, I posted about how the cost to replace an employee is going up because it's not just, it's not just the salary that you're having to recover. You're having to reengage your training expenses. You're having to reengage just different expenses that kind of add up over the big picture. So just being able to offer something that's gonna, it's not outsourcing, so you're not having to pay extra commissions, and it's also flexible. It's a flexible team just to be able to insert or move them from the cost structure as needed.
So I guess kind of backing up, going to like a really, really basic standpoint, how would you explain the revenue cycle in its entirety? Maybe to someone who has never heard of it or is super unfamiliar with it, like what are the different steps and components and all the different kind of processes that go into, I guess, a well-managed revenue cycle?
So it's funny because anytime I have these internal conversations with some of the newer recruiters who are, getting involved with our specialized recruiting center specific for revenue cycle, I always over explain. So I had the chance to kind of take a step back and connect with the peer, and simply revenue cycle. If I had to explain it to somebody who wasn't as involved, it's really just, hey, how your healthcare bills get paid. It does start well before service, in terms of well before the actual services are rendered or received from the healthcare client, because you have your pre-services component where you're being registered and they're checking to see if you have insurance, so they know in advance what your co-pays might be, or they're doing prior authorizations to make sure that your insurance will cover a specific service. And then it just goes from there all the way to the back end. If your insurance company denies a payment for whatever reason, the revenue cycle team is the one double checking to make sure, hey, I think you were supposed to pay this. The revenue cycle team is the one that says, hey, I think you were supposed to pay this. Let me figure it out before we send the bill to the client. Because I think another statistic that has become more popular as we look into, not necessarily more popular, but more well known as we look into the healthcare space, is that a lot of patients don't have the funds to cover, I think it was like a $600 emergency. And some of these hospital bills get very high, especially if you're getting infusion services or whatever the case is. So that's kind of my high level overview, for somebody who might not have heard of it. It's, hey, this is a team that's going to help make sure that your bill gets, the insurance pays what they're supposed to pay, and you only have to pay what you're responsible for paying.
Okay. And I imagine, well, and what I've learned about revenue cycle is there's a lot of steps and a lot of places for error in between when you submit the claim, when it goes to insurance, that leads to a lot of denials, and then there's denial management steps and things like that, right? So there's just like a lot of places where humans are like high touch human involvement, and places where there can be like a lot of error. And so how do you try to combat that error? Like, what do you help you mentioned at Aston Carter, it's like a lot of staffing, so finding, talented people that maybe have that higher attention to detail, but what are some other ways that you've seen help combat like high denials in insurance claims, those kinds of things?
So a lot of times, if it's not an issue of having the head count, like, hey, we have enough people, but we're still having challenges. A lot of times the challenges come to just the quality of talent that is being identified. So thinking back again to the results of the pandemic, there was this huge wage inflation. So the high quality talent was making a lot more than they were 3-4 years ago. So I think part of what makes us unique is that we do tend to be a bit consultative. So if I have a client come to me and they need a coder, but they're only offering 23 an hour, it's below market. And so we have to have those honest conversations, and we're giving perspective because employers work at their employee. so they know what's going on in their world, but they may not have access to the resources to know what's going on in the market in general. So that's one thing that I think that's one of the biggest areas that we try to influence to make sure, like, hey, if you want to have quality talent, this is what the opportunity needs to look like. And not just from a pay rate, it could be even remote and hybrid. That became really, really popular. So when we have clients that are driving 100% on site, 100% on site, we're having conversations to understand, what's the business need of having these people on site, and is there flexibility? And if they have if they're standing firm and needing people on site, we just have to tell them honestly, hey, the talent pool for on site opportunity is very limited. So is there any flexibility in the qualifications that can be offset with additional training? So we're not just saying, hey, take a lower quality candidate. It's like, hey, this is what the talent pool is for what you're offering. How can that be offset by some of the things that you're doing internally to make sure that they have appropriate training and that they can come in and have the high attention to detail needed to do their best? They are humans. There are going to be errors. Unfortunately, nobody's 100%, but hey, let's work together to figure out how we can get these humans operating at 95, 97% of whatever the quality metrics are.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but and you know this about us here at Enterbridge, one of our specialties is robotic process automation, and we work closely with healthcare clients, a lot of times specifically in the revenue cycle space. But I guess based on your observations, how do you see like our expertise aligning with rev cycle management, and where do you see opportunities for automation to really like thrive within the rev cycle space?
Yep. So one of the things I do constantly hear at various webinars and institutes is around automation being very helpful when it comes to getting rid of non-revenue generating work. So within any job, there's a job that drives revenue, and then there's the administrative work. And the administrative work can be a bit time consuming. So automation there's definitely a drive specifically for RPA in that space. It can be something as simple as rebilling, because it's not always something super complex that needs to be corrected for a claim to be rebilled to the insurance payer. It could be screening. I know one client, they use RPA to screen financial assistance applications and figure out, hey, where can we find something for this self-pay client? Because again, going back to what I said about the expenses that fall on individuals, self-pay bills are not cheap. I've seen some for myself personally, and I'm pretty sure my jaw hit the floor. um, so being able to have an automated feature to screen, like to go through various websites and figure out how can we get this person financial assistance so that they're not forced to bear the brunt of the entire bill. And as a provider, we can also impact our bottom line. And then I even witnessed a case study where they were using RPA to submit the initial prior authorizations. Now, despite the complex guidelines that some payers have, there's still some services that can be easily approved, I believe through the online portals even. So having RPA to kind of go through and submit some of the less complex ones, and then having a person, if it gets denied for whatever reason, to be able to go through and, prove that medical necessity for approval. But some of those tasks are ones that come to mind in terms of how Interbridge, who specialize in RPA, can really carve out a space for themselves within healthcare organizations.
Very cool. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this, off camera before, but one of the things that you brought up is this concern that some people have in revenue cycle about being automated out of a job. So how do you address that fear? Like, obviously you seem like you've learned about automation, you are actively researching it. It's something that you're interested in. So how would you like address that fear of like being automated out?
So we talked about that, and I specifically told you it was my first conference setting post pandemic, and they started talking about automation. And my immediate thought, I was one of the people who was fearful, because I'm like, well, if they're going to automate everything, they're not going to need people. And if clients don't need people, I don't have a job. So my concerns were very much in line with somebody who might be one of these employees. And what I've learned, and this is kind of how I rationalize it. So kind of going out of industry, we look at warehouse environments where they're adding robotics and automation, but they still need people for the complex things. And it's the same thing in healthcare. So yes, you can automate some of the non-revenue generating work and even some of the simpler components that may be a little bit more revenue generating. But again, when we look at the challenges, we still have the issue like payer guidelines are constantly changing. What was approved 5 years ago may not be approved now, and so it's going to take somebody, a physical person, to be able to handle some of those more complex things. Even coding auditing might be an area where, hey, there's some components that might be able to be automated, but when you're dealing with denials or downgraded DRGs, having somebody who's specialized and experienced to be able to go through and lay eyes on them and provide that information needed to get that claim paid essentially is going to be huge. And then, like I said, complex denials. Everything's not always denied because the date of service was incorrect or the last name was the person's maiden name. Sometimes it is a little bit more. It does require a little bit more hands-on work. So I would say see what the opportunities are to increase your skills. Because again, if you're in one of those non-revenue generating roles where you're just doing the simple rebilling or you're looking at financial assistance programs, that's something where it might get automated out. But if you're gaining your knowledge within revenue cycle, you're seeing what opportunities there are for your current employer to upskill you, or getting involved with some networking organizations that do offer that additional knowledge and experience, there's always going to be a place for those types of employees within the healthcare system. So a little bit of relief for me to recognize, and hopefully that helps somebody else who might be a little concerned about automation becoming so popular.
Well, and also I think there's a huge space for people in rev cycle to learn automation. There are a lot of pretty low barrier to entry ways that you can become familiar. We use UiPath at Enterbridge, which is kind of the leading software provider in RPA, and very popular. And they have a lot of resources about kind of starting from a very foundational level of how to automate your own personal tasks. And then you can kind of scale that up. So when you talk about upskilling specifically within rev cycle, you can also upskill in your technological skills, because that would make you a really valuable asset in rev cycle if you're able to do both, right? To have the technology standpoint, kind of mastered, or maybe not mastered, but you know what I mean?
Right.
And then also having this, exactly. And then having the subject matter expertise, that would make you a pretty
Double threat for sure.
competitive applicant. Yeah. Well, cool. That's it's interesting hearing, you had those fears yourself, and as you've become more and more, versed in the technology and understanding where it fits into the space, that it's become less of a concern for you and something that you can advocate for and something you're excited about.
Oh yeah, I definitely don't shy away whenever I'm talking to clients just about their business needs. Beforehand, I probably wouldn't mention technology just because I didn't want to give them any ideas. But now I'm asking, hey, what technology are you implementing? How are you looking to leverage automation or artificial intelligence to meet some of the needs? I just lost my way. But yeah, I'm asking how they're leveraging that, how they're leveraging those before we even talk about, hey, what do you need from a people standpoint?
Yeah. Okay, so you lead with technology at this
point. I'm just like, let's start there.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I feel like for a long time, healthcare was people first, right? Like how do we get the people that we need in here? But, with the changing market, and like you said, with the tight labor market, and it's probably smart to be thinking technology first.
Yeah, because the last thing I want.
I was talking to someone. Oh, sorry. I was talking to someone yesterday who couldn't cite this quote, so that's fine. But take this with a grain of salt. Maybe she just made this up, which is fine with me too. But is every company has to be a technology company essentially, and I think that applies to healthcare now. Like you have to kind of think tech first, and And I guess it's more issue first, and then how do you address the issue? And technology kind of has to be like the first thing
Absolutely.
to address the issue before
Yeah, because
people.
you can't, we're not in a space where you can, again, knowing what the labor market is, yes, we're very skilled at finding the qualified talent that might be needed when it's necessary. But I've always been a believer of you can't throw people at every business problem. It's not like, yes, I'm in the business of providing workforce solutions, but sometimes what I provide may not be the first solution. So my goal is always to figure out, hey, what else have you explored? Like, what led to you deciding that, hey, Aston Carter is who I need to help solve it? Because the last thing I want to do is, you know, what we do comes at a cost. And the thing is, we do the work on the front end before our clients even get billed. So the last thing I want to do is have the team do the work to find the talent, just for a client to come back and say, actually, you know what? We were able to automate something, and then shift somebody into this role. So again, I think in the environment that we're in, to your point, like, yeah, everyone's got to look at technology first. What can be done with technology? Is it a worthwhile investment to is it a better long-term solution before you start looking at changing processes or adding more people to the team?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, if you had any advice, I guess, off the top of your head for a fictitious healthcare client who wants to get started in automation, what are your first recommendations? Like, where would you suggest starting?
Healthcare is a very, at least in the Atlanta market, I would reckon to say that the same might apply, but healthcare is a small world. So I would recommend seeing what your peers are doing, figuring out what other health systems might have going on, what they may have automated, what the outcome might have been, or even getting involved in some of the networking organizations. Because, like I said, they're between HFMA, Gamma, and a couple different organizations. These are leaders within health organizations who may have been through or are going through the same challenges. So rather than staying within your health system, trying to figure out what's the best solution, what's the best option, you can kind of go to these events or network with your peers to pick their brain and avoid having to reinvent the wheel. So that would be my advice: is lean on your peers, figure out what they're doing, figure out if it's something that would be applicable to your health system, before trying to figure out where to start from bare bones. Because again, automation and technology are becoming more and more are they're becoming more and more prevalent in conversations, which means organizations are looking at more and more options and offerings. So the pool, even for automation, I'm pretty sure you can attest to this from a competitive standpoint. There's so many companies out there that it could get overwhelming if you're trying to do it from scratch. So definitely don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel, because what one health system is going through is probably something that somebody at another health system is going through.
Yeah, certainly. That's a really great point. Well, thank you so much for all of your insight, and exciting to talk to you about what you guys are doing over there at Aston Carter, and excited to, keep learning from you on your platform. And I really have enjoyed your content and what you post and kind of the insights that you have. So definitely go give Jasmyn a follow. She posts a lot of really great stuff about RevCycle and RevCycle Insight. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here for kind of a revolution within this space. So,
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for the opportunity. I'm honored, and hopefully, just everything that we discussed might positively impact some people out there.
yeah, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining.
All right. Thank you.